Having an engaging community is one of the best things about being a content creator. Just in the last year, I've had several important things pointed out to me, including how stupid I was for calling Doom 2016 a reboot, how I know nothing about the games that I cover, but perhaps the most important thing which I had pointed out to me was that I should play Star Trek A Final Unity, something which I have now done. Welcome, my name's AZADash, and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Now, in terms of Star Trek games, there's no shortage of titles based on the next generation franchise. Not just on PC, but Super Nintendo, Genesis, Game Boy, and even the Game Gear. Several months ago, I examined the 1997 Star Trek Generations tie-in game. And despite praising it for offering an alternative take on the movie, I pointed out that for a variety of reasons, casual players or those without an investment in the franchise are likely to find it a hard sell. Conventional wisdom would suggest that a game based on the same characters, released 2 years earlier in 1995, should not look or play as good as the one in 1997. Alas, in the case of A Final Unity, not only do I think it looks, sounds and plays better, but that it has aged for modern audiences far better. Developed by Spectrum Holobyte, who were perhaps better known for their flight simulators at the time, it was actually one of the last games that the studio would develop in-house, although some of the team did go on to work on other ventures at Microprose and later Atari. A Final Unity released for both PC and Mac. However, there is an important footnote to these releases, as a year earlier the developer released a similar but different game for consoles called Star Trek Futures Past, or Echoes from the Past on Genesis. This game takes on a greatly simplified approach to A Final Unity's mechanics and story, while scaling visuals and sound down to suit a gaming console of the 90s. Thanks to technology like DOSBox, A Final Unity is one of the more straightforward games to play on modern PCs without requiring any complex custom solutions. Despite not having an official Metacritic rating, the overall reception of A Final Unity was generally positive, with most publications at the time pegging it at a 7 or 8, depending on how much of an overall Trek fan the writer was. My personal rating as someone who is a fan of the source material is probably an 8 or a 9. It's definitely not perfect, and some of the same issues which I had with Star Trek 25th Anniversary Edition persist, but overall it's a really solid adventure that has really stood the test of time well. I am of the opinion that the word pixel art is a far overused term in modern times. However, I will say that in the case of A Final Unity, its pixel art style, combined with a very human recreation of the environments, contribute to a somewhat timeless aging of the overall presentation. Combine this with well thought out mechanics, exceptional voice acting and movie quality writing, and you get a game that's really fun to play even 25 years after its initial release. Now, I mentioned Star Trek 25th Anniversary earlier, and that won't be the last time I do, as while the game is certainly its own thing, it does take a lot of influence from 25th Anniversary. In most cases, it evolved systems and mechanics from the earlier title. However, as I mentioned earlier, in some cases it does suffer from the same pitfalls. More on this later. In terms of the story, the game delivers a completely original plot, which is well written, well paced, and overall really well executed. Without going into major spoilers, the game opens with an introduction to a neighbouring species to the Romulans facing political unrest, in part due to a missing historical scroll which is supposed to clarify some of the issues in contention. After you begin to piece together parts of this mystery, you start to unravel another mystery about a long-lost race and the impact that finding their technology could have for the Federation. There's a lot of nods to the lore already established in the television series, such as Picard's love for archaeology and Riker always wanting to get to the point.
It's a tempting offer, but we're really anxious to find the original fifth scroll.
But what I think makes the story of A Final Unity so good is that it leans into the things which made the original television series great. As the voice opening says, Enterprise's mission is to explore strange new worlds, check, seek out new life and civilizations, check, and boldly go where no one has gone before, check and mate. Notice there's nothing in here about combat or destruction. That's because when Star Trek was at its best, it didn't rely on combat or quick cuts for success. It relied on curiosity. Now, of course, combat has a place, but my point is that this is an adventure game first, and while it does feature some combat, it's not what you'll remember after you see the end credits. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's hunt down discount Romulans, fire up the holotable, and head back to 1995 to remember Star Trek: A Final Unity. Like all good adventure games, A Final Unity's gameplay is spread across a variety of locations. These locations can be broadly categorized as onboard the Enterprise or on an away mission. Aboard the Enterprise, you effectively assume the role of Captain Picard, and you're able to interact with both members of the bridge crew and any guests that might be aboard. Interacting with these people will sometimes yield information that will either advance the plot or offer a suggestion as to the next course of action.
What do you think, number one?
The Garidians respect strength. If we show any sign of weakness, it might just encourage them to fight.
What do you suggest?
Maybe we can use our phasers until they listen to reason.
The bridge is also where a lot of communication with other ships and planets take place over the view screen, with you being able to select a variety of responses to any given dialogue. Even as early as the first mission of the game, through your dialogue, you're able to make a choice about how you handle a dangerous situation, opting for either combat or a more peaceful resolution, with your choice playing a major part in how part of the story progresses later in the game. When you're not communicating with people on board, you can view various stations of the Enterprise, such as tactical or navigation. But here's where the game differs a bit from the 25th anniversary formula. Where 25th anniversary required the player to directly interact with these systems to progress, A Final Unity offers a delegate system, which effectively allows you to delegate control of that system to another officer. For example, if you have the engineering delegation on, your chief engineer will manage power levels throughout your adventure. However, if you turn this off, you're able to manually set power levels, which can be useful when needing to boost power to weapons, for example. Navigation is also simplified, with the game often automatically selecting and engaging a course depending on where the dialogue progression suggests. There is the ability to manually navigate and set a course for a variety of systems, but while you can travel to them, there's nothing really to do there unless it's part of the main story. I feel like this is somewhat of a missed opportunity, given the developers went to the trouble to create the system for free navigation, although the inclusion of a side mission component may have compromised the pacing of the main plot. Either way, the relatively linear navigation does its job, and I never really found myself confused as to where I should go. There's also an Enterprise computer station, which, although required for one of the later missions in the game, doesn't really serve any useful purpose for the majority of the adventure, unless you do want to read up on some Star Trek lore. Now, while most of the things on board the Enterprise are well realised, the combat is not. I criticised the combat in 25th Anniversary, but honestly, it somehow seems worse here. The developers have tried to give combat more depth, with the ability to modify firing arcs, view power draw in real time, and choose from a variety of views, but in my experience, none of these choices ever really mattered, and combat was simply reduced to clicking the fire button as quickly as possible, or if you prefer, delegating it to Worf. Thankfully, combat is a lot less frequent in A Final Unity compared to 25th Anniversary, but on balance, we would really need to wait until Klingon Academy in the year 2000 until we got a great ship-to-ship combat system in a Star Trek game. Outside of your time aboard the Enterprise, the rest of your time will be spent on away missions. Depending on the difficulty level you are playing, depends on how these will play out. On Ensign, your away team and equipment will be selected for you. On Lieutenant, items are selected but can be changed. And on Captain, you will need to select both your away team and equipment. Having the right crew and equipment is critical to the success of some missions, so it is an important consideration. Once you have transported to the location of the away mission, the game plays out as most adventure games normally do. Talk to people, interact with items, and ultimately work to complete the mission. You can change the character you are controlling by clicking on the face icon, which at times is required to progress. For example, Riker is not going to have the engineering skills to fix equipment.
I don't have the technical background to install this properly.
But that's certainly something Geordi is capable of.
I think this will fix it.
You repaired our instrument. In your honor, I shall play the lawgiver's song, Traveling Music.
Likewise, there may be times when other characters will only speak to the most senior away team member, often either Riker or Picard. While you're controlling a particular character, you have a health bar for that character, and while it is possible to take damage, I was never able to get any of my away team members killed, which I suppose is a good thing. They just kind of faint and then get up with less health. One of the things which really stood out to me was the fact that you really need to be listening attentively to conversations, both with the other away team members and other characters in the environment. Outside of a tricorder with some fairly basic information, there's no real objective system per se, meaning that the path forward is sometimes not overly clear unless you've been paying attention, something that I was guilty of at one stage through my playthrough. Assuming you are paying attention though, most of the puzzles in the game are fairly straightforward and often require using various objects at various stages of the game, sometimes in a specific order. There's also some items which simply exist to give you more backstory, and that's always a nice touch in an adventure game. Oh, and as the game was released in the 90s, there legally needed to be a maze section, which instantly gave me flashbacks to the rather questionable maze used in DS9 Harbinger. Alas, the maze here is much more logical, shorter, and works much better from a plot perspective and its actual execution. While I did really enjoy the away missions, there were some minor issues. Firstly, at times it can be a challenge to work out just what you can and cannot interact with, requiring you to move the mouse over various parts of the screen. The other minor annoyance is that sometimes it can take a long time to walk across an area of the screen, which, to be fair, is mostly contained to one mission in particular. Honestly, I think I spent more time in this mission waiting for my character to walk to the next location than any other activity in the mission combined. Alas, as with the interaction point, it's certainly far from a major issue and something that was quite common in adventure games of the time. Graphically, the game uses a few different styles of presentation, with a pre-rendered FMV-like approach to main cutscenes, while the majority of the playable game uses in-engine art. There were quite a few point-and-click adventure games released in the mid-90s, and I'd argue that A Final Unity looks as good as any of the others. All of the environments have a very hand-drawn feeling to them, and while they are presented in a somewhat 2D space, it certainly suits the gameplay. Character art is really a product of the time, with only parts of the body being animated, but honestly, as a product of 1995, it's fine, and you'll be spending more time carefully listening as opposed to critiquing the lip sync. In terms of menus, it's pretty bare bones, but accomplishes what it needs to do. There is a save system, which requires you to manually save, although this can be done at any time throughout the adventure. Audio is excellent, with all of the key cast members reprising their roles.
I suggest we contact Starfleet, Captain.
Mr. Worf, your analysis.
Captain, we should check our orders from Starfleet.
Counselor, do you have any thoughts?
I'm sorry, Captain, but I don't have any suggestions right now.
Any suggestions, number one?
I'm sorry, Captain, I don't have any suggestions right now.
While it does miss some of the hilarious dialogue responses from 25th Anniversary, all of the voice acting is top-notch and really complements the excellent writing. I did encounter one very minor issue with the audio balancing when transitioning from a combat section to a view screen section.
Attention, Romulan vessel. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
I am Tirilak, commander of the Imperial Warbird Psionex.
But honestly, this only occurred once, and I can't say for sure that this wasn't due to using a modern PC as opposed to the game's original target hardware. A Final Unity is a prime example that good games do not need a heavy combat focus. Exploration, curiosity, and memory all play a much larger part than combat in the game, and it's perhaps ironic in the sense that when the game does showcase its combat, it's objectively the weakest part of the adventure. Where the game does shine, though, is making you really feel the weight on your shoulders of being a captain, something that would go on to be refined further with this cast in Star Trek Bridge Commander. However, what is here is great for the time and a delight to play. While I enjoyed the Star Trek Generations movie, I felt that some of the other movies had weaker plots and writing. After playing through A Final Unity, while I'm grateful to have experienced this story throughout the game, I do feel disappointment that we never had the opportunity to have this story told on the big screen. While it's doubtful we will ever see any of this story in modern Trek, I didn't think we'd ever see the Gorn again, and the excellent Star Trek Strange New Worlds proved me wrong there, so I shall retain some hope. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.